Well, Stephen, thanks very much, sir, for coming on the program tonight.
Always good to be on.
And tonight we're going to be talking about a recent case it's a recent decision, I guess. It's a case that's been going on for several years out of New Jersey, right?
Yeah, all these cases, I mean, one of the things that people are often surprised by how long it takes for cases to go through the system.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just par for the course. And you're right, it's a case that's been going on for a while, but and in fact, you and I talked about it before in June of last year, and back then I promised, if there were any developments, I'd get back to you on it. And what happened is 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, unfortunately, denied cert in the case. But let's start at the beginning. The NOA Civil Rights Defense Fund is funding a number of cases, and again, this has been going on for years now, that relate to law-abiding traveling citizens who have been wrongfully arrested at various New Jersey and New York airports. And the thing to remember is these people did nothing wrong. They were abiding by all the applicable laws when they were attempting to lawfully travel with their guns in full compliance with federal law. But New York and New Jersey authorities arrested them, imprisoned them, confiscated their property, mistreated them, refused to give them the property back. And the NOA investigated these cases and then assisted individuals like Mr. Revell, and that's the fellow we're going to be talking about today, in having these false charges that were brought against these people dismissed. And then, having them get their firearms returned, because usually the authorities don't even return their firearms. And then eventually we helped them bring civil actions in federal courts or against the state authorities for violating their civil rights. And the NOA Civil Rights Defense Fund has provided financial support for these cases. Now, the first thing to note is that there's a federal law, and Cam, you and I have talked about this law before, that the NOA had enacted back in 1986. And in 1986, the NOA passed in Congress as part of the McClure-Volkmer Firearms Owners Protection Act, a safe harbor provision, and that law protects interstate travelers with firearms. And the law is Section 926A of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. And basically, this law provides that if you're lawfully traveling from one place where you may lawfully possess a firearm to another place where you may lawfully possess a firearm, then you can't be arrested or prosecuted or convicted for violating a local law that prohibits firearms. Now, there are some requirements about how you travel with these firearms, like the fact that they have to be unloaded, locked in a trunk or container, and separate from the ammunition. So let me read the statute. Again, there's some conditions and requirements, okay?
Sure.
And the statute says, quote, notwithstanding any other provision of any law or any rule or regulation of a state or any political subdivision thereof, any person who is not otherwise prohibited by this chapter from transporting, shipping, or receiving a firearm shall be entitled to transfer the firearm for any lawful purpose from any place where he may lawfully possess and carry such firearm to any other place where he may lawfully possess and carry such firearm if during such transportation the firearm is unloaded and neither the firearm nor any ammunition being transported is readily accessible or is directly accessible from the passenger compartment of such transporting vehicle, provided that in the case of a vehicle without a compartment separate from the driver's compartment, the firearm or ammunition shall be contained in a locked container other than the glove compartment or console, unquote. So especially if you're traveling with a vehicle, there's some conditions here, okay?
All right.
It's not an all-out, you can carry a gun across the nation. It's not, okay?
Sure.
It's not a carry protection. Now, another thing that listeners have to know is that there's a bunch of federal regulations that deal with transportation of firearms in regards to air travel, and you have to comply with them. And by the way, all these folks that we're talking about, including Mr. Revell, complied with those. And then the last thing that listeners should know is that the Supremacy Clause in Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution provides that the U.S. Constitution, laws of the United States, are the supreme law of the land, and that state authorities and state laws are bound by the federal law, even if the state law says something different. In other words, federal law trumps state law, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in compliance with this federal law that I just read, that safe harbor provision, if you're lawfully traveling from one place where you may lawfully possess a firearm to another place where you may lawfully possess a firearm, then you shouldn't be arrested for violating a local law, okay? Now, let me tell you about Mr. Greg Revell. In March of 2005, and you mentioned, this has been going on for a while, so we're talking about 6 years here, okay?
Right.
In March of 2005, Mr. Revell was a 57-year-old father and grandfather. He has 8 kids, 8 grandchildren, married for 36 years, law-abiding United States citizen, resident of Utah, real estate broker, has a permit to carry a concealed firearm in Utah, never been in any sort of trouble with the law, okay? And again, Cam, I got to say, these laws that the gun prohibition is pushed, these are the people that get affected by the law. The bad guys don't get hit with these laws. It's people like Mr. Revell, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what this case is about is that Mr. Revell was wrongfully arrested and wrongfully imprisoned for 5 days by New Jersey state authorities because Mr. Revell had been delayed through no fault of his own at Newark Airport by flight delays and a baggage error while traveling from Utah to Pennsylvania. And then here's what happened. On March 31, 2005, Mr. Revell checked in with Northwest Airlines at the Salt Lake City Airport. His destination was Allentown, Pennsylvania, with stopovers at Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Newark, New Jersey. And there's the problem, Newark, New Jersey. Now, he was flying alone from Salt Lake City, Utah to Allentown, Pennsylvania, to retrieve a car that he had bought and to drive it back home to Utah. And he wanted to travel with a firearm, for his personal protection. And as required by federal law, when he checked the firearm in at the Salt Lake City Airport, he declared that he was checking an unloaded firearm in a locked hard case container and ammunition in a separate locked hard case container, all in compliance with the federal law and the federal regs. Mr. Revell signed the required orange firearm declaration tag that was placed inside the container holding the firearms. He complied with all the applicable laws and all the federal FAA regulations, and he had lawfully checked in his firearm for the flight. Now, due to no fault of his, the flight to New York was late, and he missed his connecting flight to Allentown. So after waiting 5 hours inside the secure area of the airport, he was directed to board a bus that would drive him and other passengers to Allentown. He was told to do this. And after taking his seat on the bus, Mr. Revell learned from the driver that his checked luggage had not been placed on the bus. Okay, it's no fault of his. Okay, so Mr. Revell gets off the bus to search for his luggage. Including the luggage that includes the firearm and the separate luggage with the ammunition. Now, by the time Mr. Revell finds the lost luggage in the lost luggage area of Newark Airport, the bus to Allentown has already left. So an airline employee tells him that the airline's computer system showed that although he had correctly checked the luggage in through Allentown, the airline screwed up. They mistakenly tagged his luggage with New York as the final destination. And he was also told there's no other connections to Allentown that night, and he was told to take his luggage and stay overnight at a nearby hotel.
Okay.
So he does what he's told. Next morning, he goes directly to New York Airport. And at the airline check-in counter, Mr. Revell, again in full compliance with the federal FAA regulations, declares his firearm, declares that it's stored in a separate locked hard case container as check-in luggage, both separate container for the firearm, separate container for the ammo, all pursuant to federal law. He again signs the required forms, and then he's directed to an X-ray area where he again declares his firearm and ammunition. And after his luggage went through the X-ray machine, and the agent at the end of the machine opens the cases using Mr. Revell's key, and inside of the case is the orange firearm declaration form that he had checked in Salt Lake City Airport. And for then 20 minutes, they're trying to figure out what to do, and then suddenly several police officers are called. They escort Mr. Revell to a different part of the airport, and there the questioning begins about the firearms and ammunition. Now, Mr. Revell, he's complying with the law. He shows them his Utah concealed carry permit, his driver's license, explains to them, look, I'm simply traveling from New Jersey, through New Jersey from Utah. I'm on my way to Pennsylvania. Here's what happened. And what do the police do? They arrest him, and then they charge him for possession of a handgun without a permit in violation of New Jersey law, and for possession of hollow point ammunition in violation of New Jersey law. Now, Mr. Revell's firearms, ammunition, holster, locks, and hard case containers are seized. He's handcuffed, placed in a police car, held overnight in the Port Authority jail. And then the next day, they transport him to the Essex County jail, where he was detained for 3 more days, okay? Now, here's the conditions he has to endure, okay? He's thrown into a holding cell with 28 hardcore criminal inmates, many of whom were admitted murderers and rapists, okay?
Okay,
this is a 57-year-old grandfather from Utah who's never done anything wrong in his life. He's sitting in there with murderers and rapists. Okay, while he's in jail, he encounters inmates doing drugs. In that holding cell, there's guys doing drugs, okay? The holding cell had one toilet, okay, for 28 people, completely clogged and covered in vomit, okay?
Yes.
He's forced to sleep on a thin mattress that reeked of vomit. People have been thrown up on it, okay? He's not even given a blanket, okay? It sounds like, some Soviet prison from, Soviet times, okay?
Yeah.
During his last 2 nights, he was provided with a thin sheet to cover himself in. He's forced to undergo a strip search in front of other inmates. He has medication. He was denied his prescription medication for high blood pressure and his medication for migraine. And now think about that, Cam. There's other inmates in there freely doing illegal drugs in the cell, but they forbid Mr. Revell from taking his doctor-prescribed blood pressure medication. Then they inoculate him against his will. During this whole ordeal, and remember it's only like 5 days, but he loses 10 pounds during that 3-day imprisonment because of improper and inadequate nourishment and just the conditions he had to endure. And he spends almost 5 days in prison until his family arranged bail. And then when they want to arrange bail, because it's a gun charge, they don't even allow any bond, okay? And they have to post cash, okay? And, Cam, the important thing to remember is that Mr. Revell had done nothing illegal. Again, his travels were in full compliance with and protected by the Federal Firearms Owners Protection Act, the one I mentioned earlier. And as I mentioned earlier, the federal law trumps state law and local gun laws that, and so this federal law protected him. Now, after 4 months, the state authorities, the Essex County prosecutor on August 2nd, 2005, finally drops the charges because they didn't have a case. But you know what? To add insult to injury, they refused to give him his guns back. So on January 27, 2006, with funding from the NRA Civil Rights Defense Fund, Mr. Revell files a complaint in the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey against the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and one of the police officers for wrongfully arresting and imprisoning him. And the NRA's New Jersey state affiliate, the Association of New Jersey Rifle and Pistol Clubs, joins the lawsuit as a plaintiff. And the lawsuit sought damages and injunctive relief for people traveling to or through New Jersey. So he's trying to not only vindicate his rights, but those of all other citizens, okay?
All right.
And count one of the complaint was under Title 18, United States Code, Section 926A, the Federal Safe Harbor Act that we've been talking about. Count two alleged the deprivation of property without due process of law in violation of the 14th Amendment. Count three was asked for relief that Mr. Revell's property be returned because they still hadn't returned the guns, the gun and the ammo. And count four sought injunctive relief to force the Port Authority to comply with federal law. Okay? And Mr. Revell later commented, quote, "I did nothing wrong, yet was arrested and subjected to the worst treatment imaginable for almost a week. I brought this lawsuit together with the Association of New Jersey Rifle and Pistol Clubs because I want to stop this kind of abuse from ever happening again. No one should ever have to experience what I experienced. I paid the price, but I'm committed to making sure no one else does," unquote. And that was what the fourth count was to get injunctive relief to force these New Jersey and New York state authorities to finally comply with the law, okay? And then the defendants on September 15, 2006, filed a motion for summary judgment, and they argued that the federal safe harbor law did not apply in Mr. Revell's case because he had left the secure area of the airport for an overnight stay, and that during that time his handgun and ammo were readily accessible to him. And they also argued that the federal safe harbor law does not apply to ammunition. And lastly, they argued that the police officer involved had immunity. Now, in an opinion dated June 29, 2006, the U.S. District Court in New Jersey dismissed the charges, and Mr. Revell amended his complaint, and the suit went forward. And on August 2008, the defendants again filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that there was probable cause for Mr. Revell's arrest because Mr. Revell had not informed the police officers that he was legally permitted to carry his firearm in Pennsylvania. Now, think about that, Cap, okay? They're arguing that, hey, he should have told us what the law is. I mean, that's a crazy idea that the cops can arrest you because of their ignorance and that it's your duty as a citizen to inform them what the law is, okay? Mr. Revell, a citizen, is not required to teach the police officers what the law is. The police officers shouldn't be arresting people who are not doing anything illegal. Okay.
And in fact, you could imagine an instance where if Mr. Revell did try to educate the officers might not take kindly to being told that they needed to be educated on the law.
Exactly, and it's standing the world on its head. It just doesn't make any sense. Hey, you should have taught us what we can and cannot arrest you for.
Yeah.
No, you're the police. You shouldn't be arresting people if you don't know what, you can't just arrest somebody for not violating the law. Well, anyways, the defendants also argue that they did have probable cause because there had been a break in Mr. Revell's travel and when he went to the hotel in New Jersey. But again, Cam, he'd been directed to do this by the airlines and airport authorities because of the flight delay and the baggage mistake, none of which were his fault.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on March 31, 2009, the same U.S. District Court in New Jersey that same judge granted a judgment, a motion for summary judgment, and he agreed with the defense that there had been probable cause for Mr. Revell's arrest and the seizure of the property, and he stated that the Port Authority had probable cause to arrest Mr. Revell because Mr. Revell's conduct fell outside the protective ambit of the federal law when he left the airport with the luggage for the overnight stay at the New York hotel, and then Mr. Revell had ready access to firearm and ammunition during that night, and that meant that he was in violation of 2 New Jersey statutes. Now, in April of 2009, Mr. Revell filed an appeal with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Okay, now the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit began its review of the case by looking at the Safe Harbor Act and analyzing whether Mr. Revell was in compliance with that at the time of his arrest. Now, the circuit court held that the federal safe harbor provision did not apply to Mr. Revell because his firearm and ammunition were readily accessible to him during his overnight stay in the airport hotel. And the court also affirmed the district court's grant of the motion for summary judgment regarding Mr. Revell's Fourth Amendment claim because the court held that the officers questioning Mr. Revell that he had and he admitted, because he's a law-abiding guy, he's not a liar, he admitted that he retrieved his luggage when he went to the hotel, and the court said this confirmed that Mr. Revell had access to his firearms. That's in a violation of New Jersey law, having access to firearms without a permit, and therefore they had probable cause. Now, the court did note that Mr. Revell was stranded in New Jersey through no fault of his own. But here's what the court says. Quote, a careful gun owner will seek the assistance of law enforcement representatives in the airport or airport personnel before retrieving his luggage, unquote. Well, Ken, that's an interesting statement. In fact, Mr. Revell did just that. He did that, and he did what they told him to do.
Yeah.
And, this is why he's in the mess that he ended up in. He did what he was told to do. And the court then went on and said, quote, a responsible gun owner, unquote, should request that his firearms and ammunition be held for him overnight, and this then would have afforded him the protection of the Federal Safe Harbor Act. But, the court did not address what a responsible gun owner should do if the law enforcement or airport personnel refuse to assist the gun owner or tell him the wrong thing, like what happened here. And finally, the court addressed Mr. Revell's due process claim, and they said that to determine whether an individual has been deprived of his property without due process, a court's got to look to the remedies provided by state law and whether those remedies are constitutionally adequate. And they said that state tort claims could have been adequate remedies for negligent loss or intentional destruction of property. And the court then held that the U.S. District Court had properly granted the Port Authority's motion for summary judgment on the due process claims because Mr. Revell had failed to explain why New Jersey state procedures to recover the seized property are insufficient. In other words, the U.S. Third Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the U.S. District Court's granting of all summary judgment motions, that the defendant had filed, and the court found that 926A, the Safe Harbor Law, did not apply to Mr. Revell, because he had ready access during that overnight stay. And this conclusion then was fatal to Mr. Revell's 14th Amendment claim because once, the Safe Harbor Act doesn't apply, then the Port Authority has probable cause to arrest Mr. Revell under New Jersey state law. And then additionally, the court held that Mr. Revell had no due process claim because he had failed to take advantage of state procedures available for the return of his property. And that was the court's holding. Now, Mr. Revell then filed a petition for cert with the U.S. Supreme Court. But as I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court denied cert in the case. Now, I want to reassure the listeners that doesn't necessarily the U.S. Supreme Court's denial of cert doesn't necessarily mean anything. Okay,
right.
While the outcome of the case is unfortunate, what you got to realize is there are very few petitions that are granted and heard by the Supreme Court. I'll give you an example. In 2009, there were 8,159 cases. Okay, got that? Over 8,000 cases were filed with the Supreme Court.
All right.
But only 75 cert petitions were granted. So the fact is very, very, very few of the petitions for cert that are filed with the Supreme Court where people want to get their case reviewed by the Supreme Court, very few of those are granted and heard by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But so I wouldn't read anything into the U.S. Supreme Court's refusal to grant cert in this case, 99% of the cert petitions are denied.
Absolutely.
And it means the Supreme Court isn't giving an opinion about what it thinks the case. It just says, we're not hearing this case.
Right.
That's all.
All right. Well, Stephan, again, sir, appreciate you coming on the program, and look forward to doing it again next week.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, sir. Stephan Thomas, CB, Deputy General Counsel of the National Rifle Association, joining us here on Cam & Company.